Psalm 11:3, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? Heavenly Father, bless, I pray, the reading of your word, the preaching to follow. Lord, I pray that you give me good attention to the text and the task. I pray, Lord, you teach us from your word as we go through it in various places. Mold us in the image of Christ. Lord, help us to be what you have us to be. In Christ's name we pray, amen and amen. The time was February of 2016, pretty recent. The place was Taiwan, specifically the Huihuan Jinlong apartment complex. It was a 17-story building in the city of Tainan. And on this day, it and everything else in the area was hit with an earthquake measuring 6.4 on the Richter scale. But while other buildings fared pretty well, the Huihuan Jinlong apartment complex completely collapsed. And it didn't take investigators too long to figure out why. They found cooking oil cans used inside the walls in place of rebar, and the concrete support columns that were holding up the building had been mixed with polystyrene foam. The builder had padded his pockets by mixing in all of that substandard material instead of using all rebar and concrete. And while everything looked pretty good from the outside, it only took a little bit of shaking to reveal the horrible truth. 116 people lost their lives in that building that day, all because of a weak foundation. You don't have to look around much in our own land to see the parallel. There's a greatness that many societies around the world used to have, and that America used to have an abundance, and everywhere you look, including here, it's going away. And the reason for that is because the foundations are being destroyed. The very thing the psalmist lamented in his time is happening in ours. There are certain things that societies used to be able to build on, and those things have been intentionally and savagely attacked for decades and decades by the devil and those that serve him, with a specific point of bringing good societies to ruin. That thought's been on my mind a lot lately, so I've been preaching through some foundational truths for several weeks now on Sunday night, things I don't want ever to be degraded or broken down in your mind or your heart or your home. Things like the truth about men and women, life itself, work, wealth, and so much more. We can be calling this foundational truths. We looked at truth is in the first message, and then the second was right and wrong. The third was life or death, and it covered the horrible sin of abortion. The fourth message was capitalism and the other isms, and it dealt with the society-wrecking philosophy of socialism. The fifth message was homosexuality and its effects. The sixth message dealt with the current corruption and weaponization of the justice system. It was called a just or unjust justice system. The seventh message dealt with one of the most front and center issues of our day. I entitled it Trans versus Truth. The eighth message was illegal aliens, immigrants, and citizens. This ninth message will be called the lesser of two evils. Now, right here at the outset, let me make a statement that I freely admit will be a bit shocking to some. Christians are often naive and very easy for wicked men to deal with. And here's what I'm currently thinking about when I say that. If Christians got together and voted, every single election everywhere in America would always go our way. And that's not a guess, it's a statistic. As of 2023, a Gallup poll says that 68% of Americans are part of some Christian denomination. That means that they should be the most feared and respected voting bloc anywhere. And that's not the case. It's not even close. And you know why that is? Because Christians are often naive and very easy for wicked men to deal with. As proof, let me give you the following statement that every single election cycle without fail gets applied by Christians to voting. And up front, if you've ever said it, I'm not knocking you. I understand the sentiment, but I don't think you know where it comes from. So I just want to teach you tonight as lovingly as I can why this statement's wrong. Here's the statement that gets used all the time when it comes to Christians voting. When faced with a choice between the lesser of two evils, choose neither. Now, that quote's a paraphrase from a shorter quote by Spurgeon, of two evils, choose neither. Mark my words, every single election without fail, including this one, that phrase gets piously posted by a whole bunch of Christians as a way for them to tell others not to vote for a guy on the right, but it never, ever gets used by anybody on the left to tell them not to vote for a he, she, it, they on the left. Which means that all of the people on that side vote, and only a handful on this side vote. Which is precisely why the 68% majority loses election after election after election to the 32% minority. Somehow there's always something about the person on the left that makes them, or something on the right that makes them evil, not worthy of our vote. The devil could be running on the left, but if the Apostle Peter were running on the right, they would never vote for the lesser of two evils because he had a hot temper and cursed in public once. So let me say it again. Christians are often naive and easy for wicked men to deal with. So let's work our way through this and see if we can get Christians thinking right on the subject. First of all, let's notice a matter of fact. Romans 3:10. I quoted it this morning. Let me quote it again in this context. As is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. I got a question. Is there anybody here that disagrees with that verse? So we're all in agreement then that no one's righteous. Are you already beginning to see then the fallacy of the never choose the lesser of two evils theory of voting? Yeah, but wait, things change when people get saved. Really? Because the last time I checked, there's one thing that doesn't change after salvation. Romans 7:18. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. That was Paul, one of the greatest men of God that ever lived, that said that. He said, in my flesh there's no good thing. His flesh was desperately evil and wicked, just like yours, just like mine, just like everybody's. But when you point that out, here's the kind of answer you'll get in return. Well, even though no one's righteous, some are surely more evil than others, and I could never vote for a really evil person. Do you realize how badly you've just torpedoed your own argument? You began by saying that we should never vote for the lesser of two evils, and then you begin to quantify the fact that some are more evil than others, and that some people, even though they're evil, are not as bad as those that are really, really evil. In other words, you've literally just advocated for voting for the lesser of two evils, because you won't vote for a really, really evil person, but you vote for somebody that you believe is just maybe a tiny bit evil. If a person is truly going to be consistent about never voting for the lesser of two evils, the only way they can do so is to never vote for anyone at all, ever. Because the moment you vote for anybody, you know what you've just done? You've just voted for somebody who is not righteous, no, not one. You've just voted for somebody who in his flesh has no good thing. You've just voted for somebody evil, and you've not voted based on Scripture or even logic. You've done so based on your personal tolerance level for evil. Let that sink in. You've done so based on your personal tolerance level for evil. From my observation, believers can be the hardest to please people on the face of the planet. Can I give you an illustration going way back? The children of Israel being led by a former murderer, and he, Moses, in spite of his past, did a really good job with them. Got 2 million of them out of slavery and into liberty. Got 2 million of them away from the pursuing Egyptian army through the Red Sea and heading toward Canaan. And almost immediately, they started talking about stoning him because they were thirsty and didn't like the food. Talk about impossible to please. Now, the people that frustrate me the most during every election cycle are the people who have impossible to meet standards when it comes to be willing to vote for someone, and therefore they either never vote or they write in somebody that's not running, Daffy Duck, Goofy, whoever, and then they feel good about themselves for doing either of those things, but then they spend the next 4 years complaining about how things are going. I'm not going to vote because both of them are bad. This one's wicked, but that one's got a huge ego. I'm not going to vote, but I am going to spend the next 4 years complaining about what happens. Let me give some spiritual advice. Shut up. Nobody wants to hear it. If you're not going to vote, shut up. Nobody wants to hear you complain. Just be quiet. Nobody wants to hear it. I've explained this before, but during the primaries, if you'll get very active, you'll have a much easier time getting much less evil candidates, maybe even some pretty decent candidates. But by the time the general election rolls around, you're going to be faced every single time with a choice between the lesser of two evils without exception. And just like in salvation, to not make a choice is to make a choice. So we have a matter of fact. Until Jesus himself decides to run for office, which I'm pretty sure is not going to happen, every election is going to be a choice between the lesser of two evils. But this is a matter of foolishness. And here's what I mean by that. Ignoring help from an impure source, quote unquote, may mean that you're ignoring the only help you're going to get. I found a great illustration of that by a guy named John Barber. Here it is. Imagine our two families are miles from land in a sinking boat. Suddenly out of the mist come two boats to save us. One's captained by an adulterer. The other's captained by a thief. Which boat will you get into? You say, neither one. I'm waiting for the evangelical boat, which is captained by a devout Christian who will end abortion. I say, you're kidding, right? You reply, both those guys are reprobates. I'm not going to choose between two evils. That's exactly what Christians are guilty of, election after election after election after election. Go to Judges chapter 15. Let me give you a scriptural historical example of that. Judges chapter 15, verse 7. This has always just blown my mind every time I read it. Judges 15:7. And Samson said unto them, though you've done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. And he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Edom. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, Why are you come up against us? And they answered, To bind Samson are we come up, to do to him as he hath done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock Edom and said to Samson, Knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this thou hast done unto us? And he said unto them, As they did unto me, so have I done unto them. They said unto him, We're come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, Swear unto me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. They spake unto him, saying, No, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand, but surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. Now I got a question. Can we agree that Samson was at least a mildly immoral man? He was horrible. Definitely not a good man. And yet, he did battle with the enemies of Israel. And their response was to come in and tie Samson up and hand him over to their enemies. Rather than fight with him against their common enemies, they rejected the powerful help he was willing to offer them. And there were actually more of them than there were the enemy. Did you catch that? 3,000 of them, 1,000 of the Philistine. What could they have done if they'd worked together? But he was such a wicked man. They did right not going along with him. Would you know what it cost them? 100 more years of bondage. It was 100 years till David finally started giving them freedom from the Philistines. They had a chance. God sent them somebody to help. No, we're not helping that Samson guy. We don't like him. It was 100 more years before they had another chance. If the only help God sends to protect you from the enemies that want to destroy you is a source that you don't think is pure enough, and you turn up your nose at it, you're foolish. You don't have to believe Samson's the angel Gabriel in order to appreciate the fact that he's strong enough to defeat the Philistines and that he isn't your enemy. That's pretty important, don't you think? So we got a matter of fact, got a matter of foolishness. But then there's a matter of formed opinion. Go to Ruth chapter 4, verse 1 through 6. Preacher, what could you possibly say about this from Ruth chapter 4? You'd be surprised. Ruth chapter 4, verse 1 through 6. Something really important happens here. Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit you down here. And they sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi that is come again out of the country of Moab selleth the parcel of land which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know if there is none to redeem it beside thee, and I'm after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. And then said Boaz, What day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now let this sink in, let me explain it. 2 guys were at the city gate that day. They're talking about a piece of property that is for sale, but there's a lady that comes with the land. Boaz wants the land, and he wants the lady. He wants Ruth. This other guy says, well, hang on a second. Who's the lady that I got to marry from to get the land? And Boaz says, well, it's Ruth the Moabitess. And this guy says this, I can't do that. Not gonna, for me to marry Ruth would mar my inheritance. That word mar is one of the strongest words for disgust in the Hebrew language. He is practically puking on the ground. He's saying, this is a horrible, awful lady, horrible, awful situation. This is terrible. I could absolutely never do that. I got a question. Is there anything in the entire book of Ruth that says that about Ruth? Everything you see about her is absolutely pristine. She is a jewel. Why does this guy, therefore, think she's so horrible and would mar his inheritance? He doesn't even know her. He's just heard. He's listened to others' opinions about her. You follow this? And this is exactly what happens in election after election here in America, and Christians consistently fall for it. Here's what I mean by that. Every time somebody refuses to vote for a solid constitutional conservative option because they know that they believe that person's evil, it ignores the fact that you only know the good or bad about candidates that the other side's media wants you to know. You are being spoon-fed positive or negative propaganda, and you're having positive or negative things selectively emphasized or selectively ignored by the left-leaning media. Let me illustrate that for you. I'm going to give you a Democrat candidate and a Republican candidate. I'll be the media, and I'll describe them for you. See if you can figure this out. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to CNN. It pains me to even say that. Anyway, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CNN. In the news today, Democrats, in a show of incredible wisdom, chose Chuck as their candidate for president. Chuck should appeal greatly to evangelicals as he spent 3 years training for the ministry. He has extensive experience in financial matters, is widely respected in theological circles, is a common small-town boy with local roots, and went on to heroically save his nation from a treasonous uprising. Candidate number 2. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CNN. In the news today, Republicans thumbed their nose at the vast majority of Americans by choosing Tom, a bigoted religious zealot, as their candidate for president. This dirtbag once called a woman a dog, has a God complex, and was twice charged with domestic violence in church of all places. He's reputed to be a drunk and openly admits to talking with demons and devils. Can anybody guess who the first candidate was? Anybody? Judas Iscariot. Can anybody guess who the second candidate was? Jesus. You see how easy that is? I can make you think better or worse of people simply by what I put in, what I leave out, what context I ignore, and what details I fail to give. Just by the words I choose, I can make you think a devil's a saint or a saint is a devil, and the media does that to you time after time after time after time. You're not going to hear when a candidate on the left showers with his own teenage daughter. You're not going to hear when a candidate on the left claims to have gotten PTSD from his time at war in Afghanistan, even when he was never in Afghanistan. You won't hear that true story of stolen valor from our media. You're not going to hear when a candidate on the left got her big break in politics by sleeping with her married boss. You're not going to hear when a candidate on the left is advocating for absolute communism in the form of price controls in the economy. And if you ever do happen to hear anything negative that they can't possibly ignore, you're going to hear it exactly once, and then you'll never hear it again. You're also not going to hear when a candidate on the right spends enormous sums of his own money to fund a Christian mission trip. You're not going to hear when a candidate on the right paid the entire mortgage for somebody who was struggling. You're not going to hear when somebody on the right paid the astronomical medical bill so a little girl could get a cutting-edge treatment. All the examples I've given are absolutely true, by the way. You're welcome to fill in the blank with the correct names if you like. And that's what makes it so naive for Christians to constantly get suckered by this never vote for the lesser of two evils philosophy. Listen to me, the only evil you know about a person that you've never met is what you are being told. And you have no idea how much good there is in a person because you're not being told that either. You're being fed a carefully cultivated picture that makes one side and one candidate look saintly and the other side and the other candidate look Satanly when none of what you're being fed bears any resemblance to reality. Mind you, all this stuff can be looked up and discovered, but almost nobody ever does it. They just take the propagandic news and believe it. So you got a matter of fact, a matter of foolishness, a matter of formed opinion, but then there's a matter of freedom. Now here's what I mean by that. As Christians, we don't need government to back us or even be from us. We just need them to leave us alone and do what we've been called to do. I hope you understand something, namely that we have a situation here in America that Christians around the world have never had before there was a place called America. We actually get to choose our leaders. There's never been a situation like that anywhere before here and now. From the time of the apostles onward, Christians just had to make do with whatever government they unwillingly found themselves sitting under, and because of that, here's how things almost always went. Acts 8:1, and Saul was consenting unto his death, and at that time there was great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem. They were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria except the apostles. Acts 26:11, and I punished them oft in every synagogue and compelled them to blaspheme, and being exceedingly mad against them, I persecuted them even unto strange cities. From the first generation of the church onward, the church had no say who their political leaders would be, and that situation nearly always led to their persecution. If you could build a time machine and go back to those days and say, hey, we can make it to where you guys get to vote and choose who your leaders will be, their eyes would get as big as saucer and they'd say, what? because they never heard of a situation like that. They never believed such a thing could be possible. Christians under Nero were being covered with tar and impaled on stakes and burned alive as torches to light his garden. If they ever had a chance to vote Nero out of office and vote some lesser evil in, you better believe they would have done so in a heartbeat. And yet our generation of Christians here in America seems to despise that very thing they would have found so precious. In a show of pious pomposity, we sniff and say things like, I would never vote for the lesser of two evils because that's still evil, not even realizing that taking that approach will one day result in that freedom being taken away. And again, as Christians, we don't need government to back us or even be from us. We just need them to leave us alone and let us do what we've been called to do. Like it or not, here's where the lines are drawn in America right now. One side of the political aisle is more than willing to shut down churches, just like a candidate for vice president currently did a couple years ago in Minneapolis. Bars and big box stores got to be open, but churches had to be shut down. They said, we don't want large numbers gathering in churches. One side of the political aisle, flaws and all, went to bat for churches' right to stay open. The left regards church as non-essential. The right regards it as essential. One side of the political aisle will arrest you for peacefully praying in front of an abortion clinic. The other side won't. One side of the political aisle is constantly threatening to tax churches, most of which are too small to even survive such a thing. The other's not. One side of the political aisle in recent years has subpoenaed pastors and demanded that they bring copies of their messages into court, and the other has not. One side of the aisle is absolutely hostile to biblical Christianity. The other, at least not yet, is not. This is a matter of freedom we're talking about. The freedom to continue to be salt and light in a society without persecution or retribution. That's what's on the line here. So you got a matter of fact, a matter of foolishness, a matter of formed opinion, a matter of freedom, but then a matter of future. Here's what I mean by that. Not voting until the perfect person comes along will cause a future where your children and grandchildren will curse your names and memories. You need to understand what time it is and what the stakes are. One of the two candidates for president right now is openly espousing outright communist economic positions. Communism is the most wicked and evil and destructive philosophy in the history of mankind, and the left side of the aisle is openly embracing it. Here's what God said twice. Proverbs 22, verse 3. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Proverbs 27, 12. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. God only has to say something once for it to be important. For him to say it twice in the same book, near back to back, he really expects us to pay attention to it. A prudent man looks ahead, sees the evil that is coming, and hides himself from that evil, but the simple person, means the naive person, just passes right on ahead and gets punished. And that's a perfect illustration of what's happening right now in America. 90 million plus people lost their lives in the 20th century due to communism and socialism. In the Soviet Union, people were enslaved, and I mean that word literally when I say it. They were enslaved for 70 years under communism. To even speak against the ruling party in power would result in a person being sent to the gulags and very rarely being heard from again. There is food rationing and rampant starvation among the population, while the handful of oligarchs running the show there on top lived in luxury. People gave everything trying to flee communism for freedom, and now incredibly naive people here in America, usually college-educated naive people, are marching in the streets in favor of communism. But that's not what bothers me. What bothers me is that Christians will sit by and let them win because they don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm sorry, I definitely regard freedom as a lesser evil than slavery. I definitely regard liberty as a lesser evil than bondage. I definitely regard being able to choose my own path in life as a lesser evil than being told what to do with my life. I definitely regard being able to have a refrigerator and a cupboard full of groceries as a lesser evil than bread lines and rationing. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but I'm trying to get a point through to some well-meaning but naive people. The Christians who do not vote because they have the foolish philosophy of not voting for the lesser of two evils are directly responsible for empowering and ensconcing much greater evils. And the world's going to fall into darkness, and people are going to look back and go, what have we done? It'll be too late. While you got a chance, do something about it. And it'd be a good idea to start at the ballot box.